There's a marketing director in Charlotte making $118,000 a year. Late model SUV in the driveway, a townhouse in a gated neighborhood, a Patagonia vest she wears to every client meeting. On paper, she's winning. She got promoted twice in 4 years. Her LinkedIn says exceeding expectations. In reality, she's never once asked for more money than the number she was handed on day one. Every raise she's ever received was the one her company decided to give her, not the one she negotiated for herself. She just accepted the offer letter, said thank you, and moved on, year after year, promotion after promotion. According to a study by Fidelity Investments, only 42% of people have ever negotiated their salary, and the majority who skip it say the same thing. They didn't want to seem greedy, or they assumed the number on the offer was already final. Read that again. Fewer than half of working professionals have ever once pushed back on a number a company invented specifically because companies expect almost nobody to push back. The assumption most people carry is that negotiating is risky, that it might cost them the offer or damage the relationship before it even starts. The data tells a completely different story. Compensation researchers have found that failing to negotiate even one starting salary can cost a worker over $1 million in lost lifetime earnings, because every future raise, bonus, and job offer afterward gets calculated as a direct percentage of that first number. What you're witnessing is called the acceptance trap, and almost everyone falls into it at least once. Today I'm going to show you exactly how this trap works, why even smart, capable professionals walk straight into it without realizing, and what it's actually costing you every single year you stay quiet. If you're serious about understanding how money actually works, hit subscribe right now. I'm building this channel to help you see the traps before they cost you, not after. Welcome to Begin Success. Here's the assumption almost every working professional carries into a job offer. The number on the table is fixed, that it's already been calculated, finalized, and approved by someone above the hiring manager's pay grade, and that asking for more is essentially asking the company to break its own rules for you. That assumption is wrong, and the data proves it in a way that should genuinely frustrate you. A widely cited study out of Columbia Business School found that the vast majority of initial job offers contain built-in negotiation room, often between 5% and 15% above the stated number, specifically because companies expect a portion of candidates to push back. The number you're handed isn't the company's final answer. It's their opening one. CareerBuilder data backs this up from a different angle. Roughly 73% of employers surveyed said they expect candidates to negotiate, and many build that expectation directly into their initial offer. Meanwhile, only somewhere around 4 in 10 candidates ever actually do it. That gap, the space between what companies expect and what candidates actually attempt, is where 6 and 7 figures of lifetime income quietly disappears. Here's the part that should really bother you. Research from Linda Babcock at Carnegie Mellon, one of the most cited negotiation researchers in the country, found that people who negotiate their starting salary end up earning, on average, between $5,000 and $10,000 more in year one alone. Not eventually, immediately. And because raises and bonuses are layered on top of base salary year after year, that initial gap doesn't shrink. It compounds. So if the assumption is false, if the number was never actually final, then the real question becomes, why does almost nobody push back? The answer is what I call the acceptance trap, and it's not a financial mistake. It's a psychological one. It has nothing to do with how qualified you are, how much you're worth, or how good your resume looks. It operates on something deeper, something most people have never been taught to recognize, let alone fight against. And until you see it clearly, you will keep walking into it, offer after offer, for the rest of your career. Let's layer in the rest of the picture, because the acceptance trap doesn't show up the same way for everyone, and the data gets worse the closer you look. Start with the gender angle. Research published by the American Association of University Women found that men are roughly twice as likely as women to negotiate a job offer. And when women do negotiate, they're far more likely to be perceived as difficult for doing the exact same thing a man would be praised for. That perception gap isn't just unfair. It's expensive. It compounds into the well-documented lifetime earnings gap that follows women through every subsequent raise and promotion. Now look at it from the bank data side. An analysis from Bankrate found that nearly 60% of workers who never negotiated their salary said it was because they simply didn't feel like they had the standing to ask, not because they thought the number was fair. In other words, most people who skip negotiation aren't doing the math. They're managing their own discomfort. Then there's the age angle, and this one's brutal. The Pew Research Center has tracked wage growth across career stages and found that the bulk of a worker's lifetime earning potential is set within the first 10 years of their career, not the last 10. Which means the habits, or the silence, you build in your 20s and early 30s don't just affect that paycheck. They set the baseline every future paycheck gets calculated from. And finally, the employer side, which most employees never see. Internal compensation surveys from firms like PayScale show that companies routinely budget what's called a negotiation buffer into salary bands, money set aside specifically because HR departments expect a percentage of hires to ask for more. If nobody asks, that buffer doesn't disappear. It simply gets absorbed back into the company's bottom line. For different angles, a gender study, a behavioral survey, career stage wage data, and the employer's own internal budgeting practice. Different sources, different methodologies, completely different populations. And every single one points to the exact same conclusion. The silence isn't protecting you. It's quietly funding someone else's budget. So if most people fall into the acceptance trap, what does the research say about the ones who don't? A study out of the Harvard Business School's negotiation program looked specifically at high earners, people who'd reached six-figure-plus compensation by their mid-30s, and tried to identify what separated them from peers with similar education and experience who plateaued far lower. The answer wasn't talent. It wasn't even industry. It was a behavioral pattern researchers ended up calling the ask gap. The study found that high earners didn't just negotiate their starting salary once and stop. They treated every single compensation event, the initial offer, the annual review, the promotion, the counteroffer from a competing company, as a negotiable moment rather than a fixed announcement. Researchers split the data into two clear groups. The first group, which I'll call acceptors, treated each number they were given as final, something to be grateful for rather than discussed. The second group, the negotiators, treated every number as a starting point for a conversation, every single time, without exception. Here's the part that surprised even the researchers. The income gap between these two groups wasn't small or gradual. It widened with every career stage. By year 5, negotiators were earning roughly 15% more than acceptors with identical resumes. By year 15, due to the compounding effect of raises and bonuses calculated as percentages of an already higher base, that gap had grown into 6 figures of cumulative difference. What's striking is that negotiators weren't more aggressive people in general. Many described themselves as conflict avoidant in their personal lives. What distinguished them wasn't personality. It was that somewhere early on, they'd learned to separate the discomfort of asking from the actual outcome of asking, and they kept practicing that separation until it became automatic. Acceptors, on the other hand, consistently described the exact same internal experience, the fear that asking would somehow undo the offer entirely, that gratitude and negotiation couldn't coexist in the same conversation. That fear, the research shows, is almost never grounded in what actually happens. It's grounded in what people imagine might happen. And that imagined risk is the entire foundation the acceptance trap is built on. Here's what's important to understand. The acceptance trap isn't a math problem. If it were, it would be easy to fix. You'd just show people the numbers, and they'd start negotiating. But that's not what happens, because the trap doesn't live in the spreadsheet. It lives in the nervous system. The first mechanism is loss aversion. Behavioral economists have shown that the pain of losing something we already feel we have is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something new. The moment an offer lands in your inbox, your brain doesn't experience it as a number to be discussed. It experiences it as something you already own. Negotiating doesn't feel like asking for more. It feels like risking what you've already mentally pocketed. The second mechanism is gratitude framing. From childhood, most of us are taught that when someone gives you something, the correct response is thank you, not can I have more. Job offers get filtered through that exact same social script. The hiring manager becomes, psychologically, the generous gift giver. Asking for more gets coded, emotionally, as rudeness, even though the company built room into the number specifically expecting you to ask. The third mechanism is status quo bias, the well-documented tendency to prefer things as they currently are simply because change requires effort and carries uncertainty. Accepting the offer as written requires zero courage and produces an immediate, certain outcome. Negotiating requires confrontation and produces an uncertain one. Even when the uncertain path has a statistically better expected outcome, the brain consistently prefers the certain one. And the fourth mechanism is social rejection sensitivity. Humans evolved in small groups where being cast out meant real physical danger. That ancient wiring doesn't know the difference between being exiled from a tribe and being told no by a hiring manager. Both register as the same category of threat. So your brain treats a recruiter's potential disapproval with a level of alarm that's wildly disproportionate to the actual stakes of the conversation. None of these four mechanisms have anything to do with your skills, your market value, or your job performance. They're ancient survival software running in a modern negotiation, and they were never designed to optimize your salary. They were designed to keep you safe inside a group. The acceptance trap survives because it borrows that exact same fear and quietly redirects it toward your paycheck. Let's do an autopsy on where this money actually disappears, because it doesn't vanish in one big moment. It bleeds out in specific, identifiable places across your career, and almost nobody adds them up. Start with the starting salary itself. If your first offer out of college is $55,000 and you don't negotiate, but a candidate with the identical resume negotiates and lands $58,000, that's a $3,000 gap. Small, easy to dismiss. Except every annual raise gets calculated as a percentage of your base. A standard 3% annual raise on $55,000 is $1,650. On $58,000, it's $1,740. That $90 difference repeats and compounds every single year for the next 30 years. Next, the promotion conversation. Most companies budget promotion raises somewhere between 8% and 15%, but the offer that lands on your desk is almost always the low end of that range, because the assumption is you'll accept it without comparing. Failing to push that number from 8% to even 12% on a $75,000 salary is roughly $3,000 a year, left on the table every single year for the rest of that role. Then there's the job switch moment, statistically the single largest leverage point in anyone's entire career. Workers who switch jobs without negotiating typically see raises in the 10% to 15% range. Workers who switch jobs and negotiate the new offer see raises closer to 20% to 30%. On a $90,000 salary, that's the difference between gaining $9,000 and gaining $22,500 in one single conversation, lasting maybe 15 minutes. And finally, the bonus and equity conversation, the one almost nobody touches at all. Signing bonuses, performance bonuses, and equity grants are treated by most employees as fixed, non-negotiable line items. They are not. HR departments routinely have flexibility here that exceeds their flexibility on base salary, precisely because so few candidates ever ask. Add these four leak points together: starting salary, promotion increments, job switch leverage, and bonus structure, and you get what I call the fixed cost trap of your career. Treating every one of these numbers as fixed, immovable, already decided, when in reality almost all of them have built-in room that simply evaporates the moment you say yes without asking. Let's run the actual math, because numbers settle this faster than any argument can. Picture two people, same college, same degree, same job title, same starting offer of $60,000. Call them Person A and Person B. Person A never negotiates. Not the starting offer, not a single annual review, not the one job switch they make at year 10. They simply accept whatever number lands in front of them and assume that's just how it works. Their salary grows through standard annual raises of 3%, plus one job switch bump at year 10 of 12%, the average for someone who doesn't negotiate the move. Person B negotiates every single time. Starting offer goes from $60,000 to $63,000. Annual raises average the same 3%, but every other year, they push for an additional 1% during the review conversation, landing them closer to 4% on those years. At year 10, they also switch jobs, but they negotiate that offer, landing the 25% average bump that negotiators typically see instead of 12%. Run both forward 20 years. Person A, accepting every number as final, ends year 20 earning approximately $98,000. Person B, negotiating every number, ends year 20 earning approximately $151,000. That's a $53,000 difference in a single year's salary 2 decades in. But the real number isn't the year 20 salary. It's the total earned across all 20 years combined. Person A earns a cumulative total of roughly $1,520,000 over that period. Person B earns a cumulative total of roughly $1,890,000. That's a $370,000 difference. Same degree, same job title, same starting company, same intelligence, same work ethic. The entire gap exists because one person had a handful of short conversations the other person never had. And this math doesn't even include what Person B could have done with that extra money if even half of it had been invested instead of spent, which, over 20 years in the market, would have added another 6 figures on top. Read that again. Nearly $400,000 in lifetime income separating two identical people, created entirely by a difference in willingness to ask. So how do you actually escape the acceptance trap? I'm not going to pretend this is easy, because it isn't. It requires a handful of genuinely uncomfortable choices, and I'd rather tell you the truth than sell you a shortcut. The first uncomfortable choice is sitting in silence after you ask. When you counter an offer, the natural instinct is to immediately fill the silence with justification, apologies, or a quick, "But I understand," if that's not possible. Don't. Ask your number, then stop talking. The silence feels unbearable. It's also where the negotiation actually happens. The second uncomfortable choice is asking before you feel ready. Most people wait for some future version of themselves, more confident, more experienced, more deserving, before they're willing to negotiate. That version never fully arrives. The research is clear that the skill is built by doing it underprepared, not by waiting until you feel entitled to it. The third uncomfortable choice is treating every offer, not just the first one, as a starting point. That means the annual review. That means the internal promotion. That means the moment a recruiter slides into your inbox with a number that feels generous. Generous and final are not the same word, and the acceptance trap survives by convincing you they are. The fourth uncomfortable choice is accepting that someone, somewhere, might say no. A no is not catastrophic. It is, statistically, The most common outcome that costs you absolutely nothing, because in the overwhelming majority of cases, a respectfully negotiated ask simply returns you to the original offer you would have accepted anyway. The downside most people fear barely exists. The upside, as we just calculated, is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over a career. None of these choices are complicated. They're uncomfortable, which is a different thing entirely. And discomfort, unlike difficulty, is something you can simply decide to tolerate for 15 minutes at a time. So here's the real question, the one underneath all of this. Every number you've ever accepted in your career, was it actually the right number? Or was it just the first number, accepted on autopilot, because asking felt harder than staying quiet? Your next offer, your next review, your next conversation is going to ask you that same question again. The only thing that's changed is whether you're finally going to answer it on purpose.